Patrick Christys, very good to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. You are the lead presenter of GB News, which very recently overtook the BBC to take the #1 spot as the biggest news channel in Britain. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And in the space of 4 years, GB News started from scratch and has become the biggest news channel. So you are a major face of Britain now, investigating all sorts of stories. On your bio on GB News, you actually mentioned that you made a documentary exploring the migration route from Morocco into Spain and on into other European countries. You are recently going to the ports in Britain, to towns which are being affected by migration. Could you tell us a bit more about what you're seeing on the streets in Britain?
Yeah, gosh, really, it's an incredible sight to see how things have developed, not just in this country, but right across Europe. I mean, you mentioned there the original documentary that I did a good number of years ago now, I think before Brexit, looking at that migrant route through Morocco into Spain and the Spanish enclaves, and then obviously onwards into Europe. And that feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like at that moment in time, people didn't want to believe what was coming their way. Now we are living in the reality of that. I mean, talking about immigration, both legal and illegal, there are so many different ways that you can break into Britain now. You've got what's going on in the English Channel, you've got people coming in the back of lorries, you've got people coming over as student visas and then overstaying the visa, you've got people coming over on work visas, overstaying in their work visa, people coming over as carers. I mean, we lost about 150,000 carers. You know, and where are they? There's some in this park, or they're just over there, just desperately trying to care for someone. No, they've vanished. They've gone into the system. You've got people coming over and working illegally in things like delivery drivers. You can literally just land at Heathrow Airport, having paid for a business class ticket from somewhere, anywhere in Africa or in the Arab world, set foot, kiss British soil, and then you are then able to claim asylum. So there is just an unbelievable number of ways that you can essentially break into Britain, and we will probably let you stay. That's the thing. Your country doesn't even have to be at war. I mean, there's a case recently that the BBC were highlighting of a lady from Tanzania. Now, I had a look at Tanzania. She's currently in a migrant hotel, claiming about the level of anxiety that people in these hotels feel and their day-to-day life and how it's a miserable existence. Well, Tanzania is widely regarded as one of the safest countries in Africa. It's a massive tourist destination.
I've been there twice in the last 3 years.
Was it nice? Was it lovely?
Beautiful, very calm. They have a nice rule, no plastic bags.
Right, well, there you go. I mean, I get that there are parts of it, I think some of the border regions, but then you'd just move to another part of Tanzania, wouldn't you? Why is it Britain's problem? And some people will say things like, well, you know, they don't do particularly well with gay rights. Well, again, why is that Britain's problem? So you can understand here, we are basically becoming a dumping ground for the world's problems. They are now all our responsibility.
Yes. So people in Britain who want to gloss over this immigration problem would say, we're a rich country, we've got these broad shoulders, we should be helping. What do you say to that?
Well, we're not as rich as we certainly could be. Yeah. We are generous to a point of national suicide now. I mean, if you ask the average Brit whether or not they feel better or worse off than they did 10 years ago, we've got massive amounts of food inflation. I mean, even some of the basics, you know, like butter has gone up something like 12% in the last couple of years. Coffee is up about 18%. All of these things, you know, beef and mince, I think, is up 20-odd%. So these are the basics. Our energy bills are going through the roof as well. You know, things like transport costs, or all of that. So life pressures are mounting. You know, rent, insurance costs. I mean, you know, even just if you wanted to rent somewhere around here, people are being priced out in the market because there are huge pressures. There's also huge pressure on our public services. I mean, again, you know, if you talk about a rich country, I mean, I think that would imply that there's, you know, good, solid, functioning public services that your ordinary, hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding Brit would have good access to. Well, that's not the case. Massive NHS waiting times, no school places in some parts of the country at all. You know, like we said about a housing crisis. So there's all of these pressures. You know, we are not the land of milk and honey that some people like to portray it as. And it is incredibly frustrating because it does feel as though in Britain at the moment, the only people who are better off, really, are people who've arrived here illegally or people who have come here legally and know how to game the benefit system. I mean, we have the largest benefits bill that we've ever had in Britain at the moment. And another tell, and this is, kind of a looming crisis, really, is the levels of younger people who are now unemployed or economically inactive, who aren't even looking for work. And there's twofold to that. I mean, firstly, you could argue there's a lot of those people who don't feel as though they've got a particular stake in British society and therefore can't be bothered. But there's another thing there, which is that, they obviously don't feel as though there are any opportunities for them here, and that is a big problem. So we are not the land of opportunity and milk and honey that some people would like us to believe, unfortunately.
Yeah. You speak very openly about this. We've obviously this week been meeting all sorts of people on the street, other interviews. People on the street often will say and indicate that there's big unease, but then clam up and refuse to say there's a problem with immigration, for example. There is too much immigration. Why do you think people are so nervous to speak? We're supposed to be the land of freedom of speech, the original mother of all parliaments in Britain, championing freedom of speech and rights for all since Magna Carta. What's gone wrong here?
Well, I think it's largely twofold. Firstly, people were too afraid of being called a racist, even though they just had genuine views and were making observations that they can see and hear around them. So there was that. I think the second thing is that until recently, we didn't have the facts. So we had anecdotal data, but our government, successive governments, have done their best to try to hide the actual figures. So, for example, migrant crime stats by ethnicity and nationality. Also, things along the lines of economic inactivity amongst certain different demographics, like, for example, the British Pakistani community. All of these things were buried or hidden, overtly hidden. So people didn't feel as though they necessarily had the confidence to come out and voice what they really kind of believed was probably happening. Whereas now, I think, unfortunately, what's happened is that we've hit a breaking point. So everyone has a breaking point. I think we've got to that. So that's made people willing to speak more freely. But, when it comes to the immigration side of it, you've got the sense of unfairness and the idea that the social contract has been completely broken. So you've got men and women who have just arrived in this country illegally, being put up in some cases 4-star hotels, or indeed just being given properties, houses of multiple occupancy, having literally every single thing paid for them, but also being given perks on top of that as well. So for example, in places like Oxford, they could be given free driving lessons. There's a local council somewhere around here, Croydon, I think, where you can learn how to become a DJ, a nightclub DJ, and you taxpayers. All of these different perks that other people, ordinary people, simply do not get. Then you've also got the crime aspect on it. I mean, there are cases going through the courts at the moment. One is an Ethiopian man who is alleged to have 8 days after arriving in Britain via a small boat, approached a 14-year-old girl sitting in a park opposite his migrant hotel and made sexual advances towards her in front of people, refused to stop, then forced her to engage in sexual activity with another person whilst he became aroused, all of these things. And this is sadly now like a day after day after day situation. And people have had enough of that. But then you've also got the other aspect to it, which is the legal immigration. And there are entire towns in Britain, I would argue in the case of Birmingham, it's largely really an entire city, that's Britain's second city, that have been changed wholesale by mass immigration, predominantly from the subcontinent, and actually in some cases specifically from Pakistan. And actually not even the entirety of Pakistan, a section of Pakistan, an area called Mirpur, which is where, unfortunately, a lot of the grooming gang criminals, rape gang criminals, have come from. So if you were to go to places like Burnley, Blackburn, parts of Birmingham, as I've said, parts of Manchester, if you weren't from that area, you might think you might think you were in Mirpur. And some people will say, well, it's had its benefits and all of this stuff. And I think initially you could argue that it had, nice to have the food, isn't it? Nice to have a little bit of vibrancy. But when you also see what's happening now politically, and this is a problem, like a place in Birmingham, they elected a local councillor who's a young female doctor who literally ran on a ticket that many would regard as essentially being a pathway to Sharia law, where segregation of the genders and all of this. So now there's the additional aspect to it, which is also the politicisation of the British Pakistani movement and some of the parts of the Middle East as well, which is inherently very un-British and often, is based around a stricter, more fundamentalist interpretation of the Islamic religion. So we're seeing all of these things come together now, and I think people are more willing to say, well, maybe we're at a bit of a kind of line in the sand moment where we have to have a conversation about where we go from here as a country, because what does it all look like in, say, 10 or 20 years' time?
Current government, with obviously many Muslims as part of that government, are pushing for an Islamophobia law right now. You mentioned this on your news programme in the evening a couple of days ago, saying this is potentially going to lead to civil unrest if they push for this. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so a little bit like what we just spoke about before, where you said to me, why were people so afraid to speak their minds earlier on? Well, it was kind of because they were, as I've said, afraid of being racist, all this, that and the other. Well, that's kind of gone now. So people are willing to speak more openly. And then that poses a problem, I think, for a lot of people on the left who have, A, maybe a bit of an open borders fanaticism, or B, just the people who have pushed for exactly the scenario that we find ourselves in now, high levels of immigration from Muslim countries, etc., who now don't necessarily want people to be free to point out some of the issues that we have as a result of that. So what's the way that they can try to silence people? It will be to introduce this Islamophobia definition. Now, we're yet to see the exact wording of it. However, as I understand it anyway, it could clamp down on people discussing things that are critical of things that are even, quote, perceived Muslimness, I think is a phrase here. Well, the problem that we're going to have with this is that if I wanted to, or anyone wanted to talk about the rise in Islamist terrorism, that could be seen as like an attack on all Muslims, even though it isn't, unless, all Muslims happen to be terrorists, which of course they're not. If we wanted to talk about the Pakistani rape gang scandal, well, could that then as well be classed as Islamophobia? If we wanted to mention the fact that we are now the Western capital for Sharia courts, 85 Sharia courts and counting here in Britain, would that be seen as Islamophobic? If we wanted to have a conversation about the burqa and about full face coverings, would that be seen as Islamophobic? So you've got all of these different things now which could really stifle freedom of speech. And in terms of the idea of civil unrest, well, obviously I don't want to see that. I don't think anyone wants to see that. But it's very easy to see a situation where someone says something, well, literally this conversation now, I mean, in theory, might be illegal. I mean, we might have just been prosecuted under this kind of Islamophobia definition.
Well, there's other things as well. There was a story a couple of weeks ago of a shopkeeper in Wrexham, Wales, who put up a sign in his window saying, owing to scumbag shoplifters, we now have to lock the cabinets and you have to ask me to come in. Someone complained to the police about that.
Presumably a shoplifter.
And he gets a knock on the door from the police saying, you can't say that. It's absolutely ludicrous.
So we can't offend, quote, scumbag shopkeepers,
so the victim,
shoplifters.
The victim of the crime is now in the wrong.
And the other aspect to that was there was a police chief who basically told us that we should be the ones tackling shoplifters ourselves. So, in Britain at the moment, we have a situation where if you walk into a supermarket, something like cheese will be behind a security container, and then by the time you got that taken off, and you paid for it, that cheese has gone up in price by about 20%. But someone comes in, nicks it, and then we're supposed to tackle the shoplifters. It's a slightly perverse setup that we've got at the moment. And again, no one really wants to talk about this aspect of it. We've never had shoplifting on burglary and theft at the kind of record levels that we've got now. We've never had that. We've never had, kind of like stabbings or gun crime or all of these things, that at the kind of levels that we've got now. And why is that? Is it? Okay, partly, probably, because people feel a bit worse off and maybe they're more inclined to lean towards a life of crime. Yeah, fine. Is there another aspect of it there? Are we importing people from cultures where that's more commonplace? Are we importing people who have no respect for law and order and our way of life? Are we importing people who don't have any respect for our country and are therefore perfectly content to walk around desecrating it? Well, I would suspect that, or I would suggest that kind of all of those things are true. And we're living in that particular moment at the moment. But just on that Islamophobia thing again, so this is something that's quite important. There was a group that's called the Centre for Media Monitoring, which actually is, or was, an offshoot of the Muslim Council of Britain. They did an entire report into GB News, and specifically really me. They named me more times than any other GB News presenter, and basically accused me and GB News of being an engine of anti-Muslim hate. Now, when you do that, obviously, they would say that they were just reporting something as they saw it as fact. I would argue that you're deliberately trying to put a target on my back, because there is a particularly militant subsect of that religion that is willing to, if they feel as though you've offended their religion and that you are in some way an Islamophobe, can take the most extreme action and kill you. And I do think that there was an aspect of that they were trying to do. But again, what they pinpointed there, and they fundamentally misquoted me sometimes, but the other things that they addressed were, Patrick Christys has mentioned Islam X amount of times. In that, they included times I'd mentioned terror attacks, times I'd mentioned grooming gangs, times I'd mentioned all sorts of news stories like MI5 saying that the Iranian government had planted sleeper cells over here, and they'd bracketed all that as times I'd spoken about Islam. Well, I'm sorry, but unless you are a terrorist, a member of a grooming gang, or a member of an Iranian sleeper cell, I don't see how that should offend you. But that's the point as to how easy it could be to try to silence people, because if you were just your average Tom, Dick and Harry on the street, and you had a job like in your local estate agents or at your local supermarket, and someone slaps a label on your back that you're an Islamophobe, that you'd be inclined to shut up and stop talking about it. You know, not everyone is in the position that I'm in, where you have a large platform every night to be able to come and clap back. And that's how they get people. That's how they silence people.
Absolutely. You're speaking very openly, but on the street, often we'll find, for example, yesterday, met in Leicester Square, a lovely Pakistani lady there with her family having a day out in London. She came over from Pakistan, aged 11. She would be in her 40s now, speaking very openly, saying she wants her children to leave Britain. She would not advise that I came back to live in Britain. I said, well, can we get the cameras rolling and have that? She first of all called her husband on the phone for permission to have an interview with me, which I found, I'd never seen that before, asking your husband permission to have an interview. And once we got the cameras rolling and a microphone in her face, completely clammed up, wouldn't say any of that.
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually, because yesterday there was a report that came out where this government is now trying to launch a special kind of, not task force, but inquiry policies around things like honour-based violence, female genital mutilation, forced marriage. Now, these are basically all imported problems. Issues around cousin marriage as well. So we now have specialist incest nurses in parts of Britain, Birmingham again, for example, to deal with the fact that we have huge numbers of people who marry their first cousins, because that is a common practice in parts of Bangladesh, Pakistan, to an extent India, as well. So we've imported that problem.
So the taxpayers having to fund
and plus
specialist incest nurses.
Incest nurses, but then also, clearly, if there are then problems with the child, which there can be, then we pay for that care as well. We've also got specialist clinics, again, in parts of the country, dotted around, but predominantly in areas with a very high population from people from the Middle East and the subcontinent, to deal specifically with female genital mutilation. It's also an African problem as well. To deal with female genital mutilation. We have specialist groups to deal with things like forced marriage. And the fact is, this is an issue that has been self-inflicted. Honour killings. We've had I think it's coming up to one of the anniversaries of a British Pakistani girl who was from Warrington in Greater Manchester, whose parents killed her because she was becoming too westernised. And these are the kind of cases that you would hope to only ever see one of before there is serious, swift action about. But you don't. You see them popping up time and time again. And there is a serious problem in Britain with young people, predominantly girls, but it does affect boys as well, being taken back to villages in Pakistan, married off to someone they've never met or are related to, and then brought back to Britain, or potentially in some cases just left over there. This is happening quite a lot. But again, people did not want to recognise the fact that this is a cultural issue. Now, look, as far as I'm concerned, if that's your cultural norm in parts of Africa or in parts of Pakistan or whatever, then that's very much up to you. What you do over there is none of my concern. I might not approve of it, but I don't really care. I don't lie awake at night thinking, gosh, I hope they sort themselves out over there in Mirpur. But when you actually come to Britain and you start doing that here, and then you maybe start covering up and it starts affecting people's lives, and we have to start bending over backwards, so accommodating you with specialist incest nurses or police clinics specifically for FGM and all of that stuff, then I think it does very much become our problem here in Britain, and you should be willing and able to address it. When we had a member of parliament who stood up and basically went into bat for cousin marriage, and that was he's a member of parliament from the same part of the country where a school teacher had to go into hiding because he showed a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad to a child, and he will be in hiding with his family for the rest of his life because a mob of Muslim men turned up outside that school, Batley Grammar School, and were demanding for his blood.
So, again, you announced this, I think, on your Monday evening programme just a couple of days ago. Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party, leading in the polls, regularly reporting over 30% of the polling, would not win an outright majority if that was a general election tomorrow, but would certainly be the largest party forming the next government if that momentum is maintained. He has announced that if he becomes Prime Minister, if he forms the next government, he will instill mass deportations in Britain.
Yep.
Is this realistic?
Well, it's going to have to be realistic because, unfortunately, we've got to a situation where that's exactly what's needed. I mean, he's said that he's going to do 600,000 deportations within his first term in office. He's also said that he is willing to create bases in this country, I suspect using either disused or extending current military bases, with the capacity to house about 24,000 people, so essentially large-scale detention centres. I mean, we know that can be done because during the COVID pandemic, we managed to knock out 5, I think, Nightingale hospitals in the space of no time at all. So it can be done. You just have to actually try. So there's that. Also things like doing returns agreements with countries like Afghanistan and Eritrea, where there's, high percentages of people coming illegally. There's a whole raft of measures that he's unveiled yesterday. Okay, a few things on that. I mean, it can only be done if we do remove ourselves from or ignore certain international courts and certain international treaties. And for a long time, since Brexit, really, there's been a conversation about British sovereignty, but a resolute unwillingness to actually do anything about that and claim sovereignty and be in control of our own borders. I mean, are you a proper country if you're not in control of your own borders? And Britain is not entirely in control of its own borders. So
it does, I mean, at a superficial level, although it's part of the problem, I see in Britain, since Brexit was legally finally enacted after a long, tortuous battle in Parliament and with the people, that EU laws are still implemented in Britain. For example, plastic bottle caps attached to the bottles. This is EU sausage factory regulation, nanny statism, and implemented in Britain. You seem to have a civil service that will not follow an independent Britain.
As a civil service, I think we've also got a huge question marks over our judiciary. Why are some members of our judiciary also part of diversity and inclusion boards? So what does that really mean? Does that impact their decision making? I mean, we've had judges do ludicrous interpretations of the law, like a judge called Hugo Benedict Norton Taylor, I think it is, so man of the people, and he interpreted a law about Ukrainian refugees, which was really singularly designed for Ukrainian women and children to come to Britain, very often on a temporary basis until they really have a view to go back. He interpreted that to include Gazans. I mean, how? What kind of mental gymnastics do you have to do to do that? And with it, could have opened the door for the entirety of Gaza to be able to claim asylum in Britain. Just to come back to that Nigel Farage point there, really, the point is about deterrence, isn't it? So currently, we have a situation where if you make it to Britain, there is an overwhelming chance that you'll be able to stay. Even if you're rejected at the first attempt, you'll be able to appeal more or less an unlimited number of times. There was a case of a Nigerian woman who appealed 8 times, and at the 8th attempt, she lied, really, and said that she was a member of a prescribed terrorist organisation, but only one that was prescribed in Nigeria. Therefore, if we sent her back to Nigeria, she would become a persecuted individual. It was complete fabrication. Even during the court hearing, the judge said there is no evidence for this whatsoever, but granted her asylum anyway. So that's where we are in Britain at the moment. So what?
Consistent,
Yeah. So what Nigel Farage wants to do, I would argue, is just quite normal. So use border force instead of ferrying the illegal migrants in across the English Channel to actually try to keep them out, try to find the people who are here illegally and then try to get rid of them. I think that it's not a normal country that would put some of these people up in 4-star hotels and give them everything as well. And at the crux, the kind of core really of Nigel Farage's point is that once you start doing this stuff, then the problem kind of goes away. So people have got a big issue with, oh my gosh, you do a deal with the Taliban. Well, firstly, I think if that's what it takes to do an initial thing, and I think people are willing to swallow that. But the point is, you won't continue having to do that because once you've deported the first wave of Afghans, they would stop coming illegally. Sure. You know, so that's the thing. You know, again, when you're saying like, oh, where are you going to build all of these bases to 24,000 people? Well, once you've got the first wave of them through that, there shouldn't be a need to continue with that base there. So,
and we have the template. Tony Abbott did this in Australia 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. This is it. But again, that requires serious will. And what is fascinating...
There's no will, you're saying.
There's no will.
There's no will.
Well, there's no will. Our Prime Minister signed a letter to try to get foreign criminals taken off a deportation flight. Yeah. You know, this is the kind of guy he is. He's made his career in life out of being a human rights lawyer, an international human rights lawyer. He even defended, I mean, again, he will say this is the cab rank rule. I'm very sceptical about that. He defended Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a banned Islamist jihadi terrorist organisation. It's only just been banned here, but he defended them in Germany at the ECHR, trying to get them to swerve their ban for being a terrorist organisation, over there. And this stuff kind of keeps happening. The Attorney General again has represented people that, like one of the masterminds of the 9/11 terrorist attack. They say they're just doing their job. How is it that these people all know to call you? Why is it that people all know to call you? I mean, if I kept getting calls from card-carrying jihadis asking me to help them, I might start to question whether or not I was in the wrong job. But now we've elected one of them, the person who was working in that field anyway, as our Prime Minister. So there's no political will there. But what Nigel Farage did yesterday was give this big announcement, and then immediately the Labour government said, oh, well, actually, we would also be open to doing returns deals with Afghanistan and Eritrea.
Just talk.
So that's all talk, but also the point is, once Nigel Farage says he's going to go and do these things and he's put his plans on paper, all of these things start to become more palatable. Think about the Overton window shift in Britain now. Yeah. I mean, this has happened in the last couple of years. I do really think GB News has had a big part to play in this now. The kind of conversations that people are having, people aren't just swallowing this tripe anymore from the Refugees Welcome Brigade that every single person is fleeing persecution. We openly laugh now when people say that these are all doctors and engineers. It's become a meme, that stuff. And
all the highly skilled doctors and engineers on those rubber dinghies.
This is it. And actually, one of the reasons, seriously, why I do now actually feel comfortable to sit in a park in public with the odd person walking past and having an open and frank conversation with someone like you is because, firstly, we've got the stats and we've got the data and I have convictions in my belief, and I think the mood of the country has shifted. But it is that. The Overton window has shifted massively in Britain now. And I think if people have the bottle, you can have these kind of conversations, and we need to, because part of the mess that we've ended up in now has been because people have been too afraid to talk about it. And what we are seeing now is that the problem is now sprawling out into so many different areas of the UK that it's starting to affect people in some of these more lovey of the luxury beliefs, and now having their faces wiped in it because their local hotel, somewhere out in the countryside, has become a migrant hotel, and then maybe some of the people that they know, their family or their friends, maybe have been affected by that negatively, and all of a sudden they start to think, well, actually, I was all right. It's
not a city problem anymore.
Yeah, I was all right with it when it was happening in Bury, but now it's happening in the Cotswolds. I've got a problem. Yeah. Well, it's a shame that that's what it took, but at least we're there now, mate.
Yeah, fascinating. As we flew over on Sunday a couple of days ago, I heard a radio report saying over 55,000 English and Union flags have been bought just in the last week. There was a huge march in Manchester at the weekend. What is this signifying, this flag movement?
Well, in a way, firstly, we'll start to say I think it's brilliant, but in a way, it's ludicrous, isn't it, that the rebellion in this country is simply by waving your own flag.
Isn't that extraordinary? Because over the last decade or so, wearing an England flag, a St George's cross wrapped around you, was considered far-right, racist,
Despite the-
extremist type behaviour.
Despite the fact that it's a fashion accessory in other countries. They love our flag. There are entire clothing brands dedicated to the Union flag. And that people, when you see tourists, you know, fighting through crowds of tourists, especially around Westminster or Big Ben, yeah, loads of them have been to the shops and they've bought a hat or a jacket or even an umbrella with our flag on it. They're obsessed with it. They love it. They don't think that there's any kind of issues with it whatsoever. You know, it's only been people like you said, the kind of the lovely liberals who say like, "Oh, our flag has been claimed by the far right and all this stuff." Well, I'm sorry, but yeah, is the Palestinian flag claimed by Hamas?
Yeah.
Well, we see people waving that all the time.
Yeah. Are we in the beginnings of a potential civil war? Because this has been bandied about increasingly now. And there's one academic we had the opportunity to interview, David Betts, who says we are on a path of no return to civil war now.
Well, I hope not, and I take a slightly more positive view to that. And my view on that is that I think we have one more chance to save Britain, and that chance is at the next general election. So there is
a route to you know, a road to happy destiny or whatever they call it that does not involve civil war. I would also just say as well that if you go and, I mean, I often report on things, it kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, you know. The French have got a stereotype for going out on the streets and, you know, over the slight thing, you put up the price of a baguette by one cent, they're out on the streets. All that. Yeah. We're not really inherently like that in Britain. I mean, the fact that we've got people painting roundabouts with the St. George's Cross, or we've got people hoisting the Union flag from bridges and all of that stuff, and that is seen as a massive rebellion in this country, I would say maybe tells you how far away we are from actually all out civil war. But there is a point beneath that, if we don't get too bogged down in the language of what does a civil war mean, which is that there's kind of an emotional civil war, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think we're already kind of having that, because
Draw better than war.
Basically I think there is now absolutely no trust between our ruling elites and specifically this government and the British public. Every time Sir Keir Starmer opens his mouth, it feels like he's lying. Every time the Home Secretary opens her mouth, it feels like she's lying, you know. And normally it's because I think they just are. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer got into trouble at the weekend because he can't even be honest about bus fares. You know, he said that he put the cap on. You know, he's saving us money on bus fares, and then he got community noted. But it turned out he'd raised the price of bus fares. You can't even be honest about that, for goodness sake. You know, what can you be honest about? So there is a total breakdown in trust. There is also, I think, a visceral hatred for Sir Keir Starmer in this country. From vast swathes of this nation, they despise him. You know, there were plenty of people who, say, didn't like Boris Johnson. There wasn't this kind of like, you know, snarling disdain that we get for the Prime Minister that we've got in this country. I don't think we've ever been led by a man who is so woefully out of touch, who's so ideologically void, who's so inept, who's just so kind of unhuman in a way. It's a complete car crash. And history will remember that Britain was at a serious turning point here, where we needed leadership. We needed we were being led by this bloke who, you know, he really, many people might think, should do the decent thing and just step aside, because for the good of Britain going forward, you know, we kind of maybe need a different person in charge.
So we've got a hatred of leadership. We've got a complete lack of trust. We also have massive societal issues. We've mentioned crime. We've mentioned cultural change there. But we've also mentioned things like the tax burden is being at its highest ever, and that's only ever going to go up. People having their aspirations sucked out of them, and all of that. And that creates a very, very volatile, very powder keg situation that is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And fundamentally, we've allowed a situation to occur where British people, ordinary, hard-working, tax-paying, law-abiding British people, don't just feel as though they're at the back of the queue, but increasingly are at the back of the queue. And once you do that to any native population, you are asking for trouble. And, you know, I would hope that the way that manifests itself, obviously, is at the ballot box. But we are seeing, you know, more people willing to take to the streets. We are seeing more people willing to go and do these protests. And, you know, it's not a mystery as to why it's happening. It's not. It's obvious.
Very interesting. So I guess my final question is, This week, I'm in Britain together with Patrick Ney, who's making this with me, collecting all sorts of views, meeting very interesting people like you, meeting our parents. Went back to my mother's home on Sunday.
Oh,
Golden
nice.
hour in the Sussex Weald, best of Britain. I was born here in London nearly 50 years ago. I left 20 years ago, went to Poland. I have a very good life in Poland. I built a business there. It seems to be relatively law-abiding. Crime statistics are manifestly better. They don't put up with illegal immigration. They built a great big fence along their border with Belarus to stop illegals coming in. But yeah, I am British. I only have a British passport. I used to work for the British government, so I feel very patriotic and care about Britain. I care deeply about the impact Britain has and has had on the world through its colonial past, its empire, the English language, the history, the culture, the arts, the sport, the engineering, the motorsport. 90% of motorsport is in Britain still. So the real question is, should I come back to Britain?
What would make you come back?
Well, I suppose various things. I could be, for some reason, thrown out of Poland and only have a British passport, so be a refugee.
Yeah.
I had an interesting interview yesterday with a lady who studies migration, and perhaps I'd come back anyway to die one day in my old age, because I think, I'm just not Polish.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm trying to ask you why I should come back.
It's interesting because I'd quite like to know that, because as we've identified, we seem to be a dumping ground for a lot of people who I would argue are from worse countries and in many cases worse cultures. And we have to try to absorb that in Britain, and the end result of that is that we become a worse country and we become a worse culture. So having met you now and or people like yourself who are, sort of like go-getters, who are well-educated, probably wealth creators, all of this stuff are the kind of people that we should really be wanting to attract. I mean, if we had millionaires coming across in small boats every day across the channel, I don't think we'd have so much of a problem, would we? So I was trying to understand what might make you come back, but it's rough.
I would say, and Britain understood this very well in the past, that I always describe capital flowing to good returns as like water with gravity, okay? And as an entrepreneur and someone who studied economics, to attract capital to Britain, it's very, very simple, actually. You've got to create the right incentive structure, which means your hard work should pay back to you and the company and the people who work in that company. In other words, have a low tax burden and see the investment flood in. I always give the example of Ireland. When I was a kid growing up, Ireland and the Irish were the butt of every joke. It was a relatively poor country, so it was always the English Irishman and the Scotsman, with the the joke being on the Irishman. Those jokes aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
From being the sort of one of the poorest countries in Europe to today highest per capita income country in Europe if you exclude Luxembourg, which also has the highest per capita per income in Europe because low tax burden, investment floods in.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very simple. That can be turned around in 10 years flat.
Yeah.
Slash corporation tax, slash personal income tax, slash capital gains tax, abolish inheritance tax. It raises relatively little revenue.
Yeah.
It's another sort of, in my view, socialist punishment on what is perceived to be the rich.
Yeah.
But it's destroying intergenerational incentives.
Yeah. I mean,
so my tax burden in Poland, I pay a personal regular tax rate on my income of 15%. Capital gains tax can be actually eliminated now under a Polish trust structure on shares and so on. Employment taxes are far too high in Poland still. Once you add up all the tax burden on the company and the employee, it's very high. But overall, the general tax burden in Poland encourages entrepreneurialism. Doesn't in Britain.
Well, also Britain, I think, historically has had some of the best entrepreneurs and that kind of genius way of thinking.
Yeah, you have to look at the likes of Aventuring, for example, to see that you've got a catalogue of these people. There's something very special about Britain and the British psyche. There must be something in the water here. But just to answer your question directly about whether or not you should come back to Britain, well, I certainly hope that you would, because you're exactly the kind of person that we would want here. What I will say to people as well, because there's this huge amount of talk, well, it's not talk, sadly it's a fact, people are leaving Britain, millionaires are leaving Britain, probably for the exact reasons you just outlined there. Look, I get it. And it's very easy to identify all of the negatives in Britain. As we've done, we could be here all day doing all of that. We can moan about it. The more difficult thing is to change it and to do something about that and to be here to try to force that change. And if people decide to go to Australia or Canada or wherever, Poland or whatever else, fair enough, you know, I get it and I understand that. But I would argue, if you really love your country, should you not stay and fight? And this is the argument that people use about these fighting age males that we see coming across the English Channel every day. Well, if you care about your country so much, well, why don't you stay and fight? Why have you left the women and children? Why don't you stay and fight and try and change it? So would it not be a little bit hypocritical to say something different about Brits? Yeah, if you really do care about your country and you do love your country and you do want to see a better and a brighter future, you do think it can happen, should you not stay and fight for it?
It's a very unanswerable question. Patrick Christys, thank you so much.
Thank you, mate. I'd love
really
that.
great chat. I mean.